Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are beginning our creator spotlight and introduction to Crowded and its creative team. For those who are new to the podcast, this is something we do. It's a spoiler-free teaser intro setup for the book that we're going to discuss for the next 3 weeks after this. We'll take it one trade paperback at a time and limit all of those discussions to the issues in those trades. And today we will not spoil anything, but we'll give a synopsis, a little bit of our personal connection to the book, and then an overview of all the creators, because we've learned the hard way that if we don't do that in this episode, all of Volume 1 gets dominated by talking about the creators. So
yeah. I mean, we want to give proper credit. We want to shout them out, and we don't always have time for that in the discussion of the book itself. So, we want to isolate that up top. So we make sure we acknowledge who worked on the book, who's responsible for its existence, and give them at least a shout out here. So, but yeah, Crowded, book from Image Comics, originally came out. It's a little weird. I don't know if it was a COVID thing or what happened with it, but it's originally a 12-issue comic that came out from August 2018 to March 2020. That's when issue 12 came out. And those 12 issues are collected in 2 volumes. 1 through 6 is volume 1, 7 through 12 is volume 2. And then about 2 years later, in February 2022, a 3rd volume came out as a standalone, I guess at that point considered just like an OGN, but it's a continuation of the story with the characters and all that. So it wasn't part of the initial run. And I got to tell you, I know we're going to get into a little bit of our history with the book here. So I'll go ahead and start. I read this comic because it was coming out. Pick it up during it's an original run, all 12 issues, and then Were you following Christopher Sebela or the whole team, or I was following?
Was it a cool cover?
Yeah, it was a book that grabbed me. I think it was Christopher Sebela, the writer, is a name that I know, and it seemed interesting, and so yeah, I picked it up and read it all the way through, and then the store was over after 12, and I don't know if I've read volume 3. It's possible I did, and have no memory of it. But in my reread right now, I haven't gotten back to it yet as we record this. So I honestly don't know if I've read it. It'll come back to me, I'm sure, very quickly. But I looked it up and realized, oh yeah, 3 volumes. And then I thought, well, I only have 12 issues. That's, what am I missing there? So yeah, it is kind of a peculiar thing that they came back to it. The whole creative team came back to it a couple years later to release another volume, but to not release it in single issue, just to put out a whole nother story, a whole nother chapter, as it were, in the form of what amounts to an original graphic novel.
Yeah, the publication of it reminds me of The Seeds, although not that drastic.
A little bit.
Because Crowded 12 ends the story you were reading.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they added an OGN to the back of it or something.
Well, yeah, but
it's still divided.
The Seeds was meant to be
correct.
It started coming out individually.
That's the big difference.
Yeah. And so what I wonder is, again, issue 12 came out March 2020, which means it was in publication. It was in the works late 2019, early 2020 in terms of what they're working on and getting it out. And then maybe there was a scheduled break in there somewhere. And of course, the world shut down. The industry kind of, was on some shaky ground there for a little bit. So I wonder if it was a matter of we have the story, but we don't know if we'll ever get back to it. And then after a couple of years, it came back around again. Okay, yeah, let's put this out. But instead of putting it out in single issue, they just decided to go, because it was all done, they just decided to put it out all in one go. I wonder if it was something like that. But and anytime a book ends or came out or just kind of spans the time around 2020, those questions always come up in terms of how much the shutdown, how much pandemic, and how much the industry being in flux there had an effect on what their publication plans were and what they actually became. I think it's always an open question.
Yeah, we'll never know the answer unless one of these creators comes on our podcast, which is not out of the realm of possibilities for regular listeners. So that's cool. I did not know really about this book as it was coming out in single issue. I don't even remember seeing it on the shelves. But I think, that time, 2019, I was probably a little busier with work and was doing like the quick in and out of the comic shop, picking up my pool rather than, lingering and looking at all the shelves when I was taking really long lunches on some Wednesdays.
Sure.
And right now I don't have the time to go during the week. So I just happened to like have an afternoon yesterday, which was a Sunday afternoon. I wasn't doing anything. My wife was happily playing with our daughter. I guess my daughter was happy, and I was like, "Could I sneak out to the comic shop? Like, it seems like no one's gonna miss me." And she's like, "Yeah, sure." And that was when I was looking at like the recent releases, and by that I mean the last 3 months, and I saw books that genuinely interest me, and I had no idea they existed.
Sure.
It just, I hate to think how many books like this slip past me like that, but it happens. But this is a strong endorsement for how I came to the book, which was I was on vacation, and I do comics tourism every time I'm on vacation. I was in Oakland, and one of the shops you told me to check out, and someone that was local there said, you got to check out Cape and Cowl in Oakland. Incredible shop.
Awesome
Incredible shop. A lot of space for Oakland, which is not cheap. Incredible, like very well curated trade collection. Like you can buy a full run of trades. It's not just like, they're very clearly very organized about keeping things in stock. They had local comics like on the front display, like local comic creators, unpublished indie stuff right up front. A pretty decent collection of back issues again for a space like that. So I was talking to them. At the time we had just finished reading Assassination and Kyle Starks, and we had him on the podcast. And so I was talking to him about that, and they said, "Well, if you like that, it's not Kyle Starks funny, but you might like this book." And they've handed me Crowded, and something about the cover, like I never would have picked this up on my own. It's not that it's bad art or anything like that. I think, it's kind of like a 90s buddy cop poster, where you've got the goofball and the assassin.
Yeah, the straight man and absolutely.
Right. And, it's very colorful and pink, and I figured it was just like a gore fest type of book. And I was like, it doesn't really seem like my thing. And I think within 6 pages, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like so cutting and witty and satirical. It's like, how do I describe this? I mean, it's like Mark Russell meets Kyle Starks in a way.
That's pretty good, actually. That's pretty good. Yeah, there is the kind of over the top violence. There is
but it's like that's part of the texture of the book. That's not what it's about.
You know what? Let me change that. I don't think over the top's the right word. Maybe exaggerated,
cartoonish. Yeah,
cartoonish. Yeah.
And I think the book looked too cartoony to be intellectually heavy.
I think that is the art style and definitely the coloring choices, that it's meant to be very bright, very pop. Pretty like ostentatious, but you're right though. When you start reading it, like there is, there's a larger commentary about kind of where our society is, where our culture is, and all that. Just taken to like 11. It dials all the way up.
Right. It's like if nothing changes, this is where we'll be in 10 years.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it's a brilliant choice from the art team. But pencils, inks, and colors. That I think it really amps up the satire of it all for it to be so bright and colorful and vivid. When Charlie's describing like the 9 gig jobs she worked that day and acting like an influencer, and it's like, her life is like really glitzy and fancy and all this other stuff. And, if he was just listening to it, like, that sucks. Like, so
there is, I think with the art style, and with the coloring choices, there is an artificiality feel to it.
Yeah.
which I think is definitely intentional. Definitely intentional. So,
Oh yeah, no, like I read so much intention into. I might be overreading it now, but I was like, this is a really smart book, and and it has one of my favorite covers that I've seen in a long time. It was like I was reading it in trade, and when I got to the second issue, you get kind of like the splash page chapter break
yeah,
of the cover, and my like jaw kind of dropped. I was like, oh damn, that's cool. Because it's just a perfect segue from one story into the next.
yeah,
And you see, a very sinister looking Charlie there, which we'll get into all that next week when
yeah.
we get into the plot. But anyway, go talk to comic shop owners. Like, if you tell them what you like, they will have comps. They will give you things that
If it's a good shop, if it's a good
yeah,
shop,
if it's a good shop, yeah. But if there were a wall of 50 books up there, I never would have reached to pick up Crowded and see what it was about. But someone who listened to me talk handed it to me, and now we're doing it on the podcast.
I mean,
And
because really, this book it's a cousin thematically of Assassination. The book we covered by Kyle
yeah,
Stark and
oh
Eric
yeah,
Henderson. So yeah, if there is there's some overall thematic elements. I think the intent and the commentary and kind of the meaning behind it is different, but on the surface, which I think sometimes can be enough to, hey, if you like that kind of cartoonish kind of patina over for hire assassinations, then yes, check out Crowded as well. It's in a similar vein.
yeah. So anyway, just a shame on me for literally judging a book by its cover. Although I will say, in comics, judging a book by its cover seems slightly more fair than
Yeah, it's
in a Barnes and Noble.
there are still some landmines out there. But yeah, I think it can be more justifiable at times, but you're right. I mean, on one hand, yes, there are so many comics out there that, when you're staring at a wall of books, how do you choose?
Yeah, you
You know,
have to have some discriminatory practices.
exactly. There's got to be some reason for you to pick it up, or sometimes you just need a reason to not pick it up. If
Yeah,
it doesn't grab you right away, well, then maybe it wasn't for you. Of course, you could flip through it and find that's entirely wrong. But when you got a wall of 50, 60, 80 books right there, and all you see are these images, how do you choose? So no, it's defensible, but there also is, I think it goes back to what you said about comic shop owners. These are the people that are, I mean, their job is to sell you something, so it's in their best interest to be informed. And not saying that every shop has to read every book, but you know, there some shop owners and people who work there who have kind of their hobby horses. If they see a book that they really like, they're gonna hand sell it aggressively, and it's not going to be, and it's going to be because they like it, because something about it grabs them, or they've read enough to, whether or not how much they like a book or not. Yeah, if you tell them something that you did like, something you have read recently, if they're kind of worth their salt, they're going to be able to make a comp for you and say, oh, well, you like this, well, maybe try this or this or this. They're going to have some options for you, which at least helps you narrow it down a little bit. Maybe it takes that wall of 50 down to a half dozen, and now you
right.
can actually make a choice, as opposed to try to grab blindly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so just case in point, good shop versus okay shop. A few years ago, a friend of mine got into the MCU. She watched all the movies in like a 2-week window. And she said, I really want to get into comics, because she came upstairs and saw like all my stuff. And so I went, I said, well, who's your favorite character? And she said, I think Spider-Man probably is. I was like, popular choice. And I went to one comic shop, who I will not mention, and said, okay, here's the deal. Never read like sequential storytelling comics of any kind before. Wants to get into Spider-Man. Where should I start her? And like, I've got time before Christmas. I can special order a book if I have to. And the guy said, that's tough, man. I just don't know. And I was like, Great. And I went to our comic shop that Alex and I go to, and I presented the same question, and she thought about it for a second. She said, I think the Ultimate Spider-Man, not the current one, but
Yeah,
the previous Ultimate
yeah.
Spider-Man, which is collected. She was like, I think that's a pretty soft entry point. It's not crazy with paneling. It's going to be pretty intuitive and easy to read. It's a pretty basic interpretation of the character, and it's good. And I was like, great. I still haven't read that Ultimate Spider-Man, but my friend has, and she got into it. So I was like, bam, that's the difference right there.
Yeah, and like honestly, like that's a pretty softball question. That in
You
terms,
would think.
especially in that sense, Spider-Man is so vast, obviously. But when someone is coming in specifically from like the MCU or the movie, whatever it is, the easiest on ramp is say, yeah, this is the original. It's a little dated because it came out, early aughts, but you temper the person reading it that way. Said, hey, you got to put your mindset back in that way, but yeah, story wise, it's an easy that one's a layup, and so yeah, that is again mark of a good shop from an okay shop. That's something that they should have at their fingertips. They should be able to pull something like that, even if it's just one book they're trying to sell. They should always have a recommendation. They should have some recommendation to sell you something, because again, that is their business. That's what they want you to do. So yeah, I'm glad you came to it. This is a book because I don't know if this would be a book that I would have thought about us talking about. It's a book that I enjoyed, but I don't know if it's one that I would have put a lot of extra thought into if you hadn't brought it up after you had been recommended it and read it.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one because I feel like. At this point, we've kind of done a lot of the major, plot themes and different types of stories and things like that. And so I'm just looking on something to chew on. And, in the image synopsis, which we'll read later, you'll see that there's one app called Reaper, another one called Defender. Yeah. And in the first issue, I wrote down all these little gig economy apps. I just made a list as they were doing it. There's like 9 or 10 of them.
As I said, there's like a dozen they mentioned in the first like 2 or 3 pages. So
yeah. And I'm like, that was when I realized like, oh, I don't know what I'm dealing with here, but this is much more substantial than I imagined, because that's a lot. That's a whole day in the writing room. Yeah. Just kicking those things back and forth. It's in like, what about an app that does this? What about, what if you sit on a park bench with an old man for an hour and feed the pigeons? So I just thought like, wow, this is really clever. And I think, culturally, we're in a moment where it's more relevant than it was when it came out.
Yeah, I think that is very true.
I would love for this book to feel dated in 5 years, but I don't see it.
It hopefully won't become more prescient, but it already is just a few years on from its initial publication and publication and completion. So
yeah. So
do you want to read the synopsis?
Yeah. I've got it and you've got it. You want to read it or should I?
I'll go ahead and read. You read it.
Okay. Sorry, the first line of the synopsis made me laugh.
Yeah.
I thought I was misreading it. No, it's 10 minutes in the future. The world runs on an economy of job shares and apps, including Reaper, a crowdfunding platform to fund assassinations. Charlie Ellison leads a quiet, normal life until she's suddenly targeted by a $1 million Reaper deal. Hunted by all of Los Angeles, Charlie hires Vita, the lowest rated bodyguard on the Defend app. That's Defend. Yep. As the campaign picks up speed, they'll have to figure out who wants Charlie dead before the campaign's 30 days or their lives are over. Yeah. It is the buddy cop premise, right?
It absolutely is. And again, you mentioned it before. You can see just from the cover, Charlie, who is the target of this campaign, she's the chaos agent, and Vita, the bodyguard, she's a straight man, and that's a tried and true storytelling setup, the slob and the stiff, and so yeah, and So you have a classic story set up right there, and then you put on this varnish of like the never-ending gig economy. The fact that there's an app for everything, and the names, which we'll get to, next week to talk about the various things here. I mean, they're so on point that we should say Reaper as an app, spelled REAPR, because it can't be an app if you have all the vowels and all the letters in there. You definitely have to take them things out. You have to shorten them because that's how it's an app. So, just from the synopsis, you can tell there's a level of satire that's going to be just right at the surface, just the idea that there is a crowdfunding app for assassination, just the fact that exists.
And all of the like the clear implications of like the moral obfuscation in society.
Absolutely,
and the rationalizing to get to the point where it's like, well, they did raise the funds.
Yeah.
So, I guess it's okay.
And to the point that there's also a bodyguard app.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, that's just capitalism, right?
Well,
it's
100%. So, you get a sense right there. I think where you alluded to it earlier. There's a Mark Russell-esque satire to this. I think we both agree. We think that Mark Russell is probably the best satirist in comics. I think he is, and so it's hard to rise to that level of kind of commentary and in your comics work. But I do think that here with Crowded, they are reaching for some of that. They're poking fun at a very specific type of social media, phone addicted influencer kind of app driven culture. So it's not quite the scattershot, large scale kind of societal commentary that someone like Mark Russell has gone through in a book like the Flintstones or something like that. So it's a little more focused here, but you get that sense on top of, as you mentioned, the buddy cop formula with the idea that there are killings that are sanctioned. So there is some wanton violence and kind of over the top nature of the world that is still effectively our world.
Yes.
This is like some crazy dystopian future. Like they are in LA, a version of our LA, just as they say, just slightly in the future. This is where a place we could be headed if things don't change.
Yeah. Very potent commentary, very on the nose. It doesn't feel like, and I think this is the interesting wrinkle to his cultural commentary. At least in my recollection of it, it does not feel like there's a particular political leaning to the commentary. It's like this is on society.
Yeah,
I think
that's true. Yeah,
liberal tech company CEOs and conservative billionaires, pulling strings are all equally culpable in a society like this.
Well, I think also the users, the people themselves.
Sure. Oh yeah. This could not happen without the people's consent.
Yeah. No, I think there is more on, that's kind of the foundation that this thing is built on, and then that's how they spin their story out of. So there's a fun mix of ideas here. Said on top of it being very kind of, we alluded to the art. It's very bright, very kind of pop artish. Very stylized character, stylized world. So it's fun to look at, and there are some there's some deeper commentary in the writing as well. So we should probably talk about the writing and the art now, since we've mentioned them. We've kind of mentioned the names a little bit here.
Right. Yeah. If you're not interested now, I guess just turn it off and come back in 4 weeks.
We'll come back. Yeah. Well, but it's a book you should definitely check out. It's a lot of fun. So quick rundown of the entire creative team. We mentioned the writer, Christopher Sebela. We'll go through their CVs in a little bit here. The artists are an art team made up of Rose Stein and Ted Brandt. Kind of depending on where you see it listed, sometimes it says that one of them's penciler, one of them's inker. All I know is they're an art team and they work together. So I don't know what the delineation of work is, if there even is a delineation of work. If you run through some of their other books, sometimes one of them is listed as penciler or an other as inker and vice versa. So I don't think we can break it down that way. When we talk about the art style, we talk about all the line work. It's Rose Stein and Ted Brandt together. So we kind of think of them as one unit. The colorist, which we'll definitely talk about, is Triona Farrell, and the letterer, who we've already talked about, is Cardinal Ray. So we're not going to run down Cardinal Ray's kind of CV. If you want to go back to the episode we did starting off of Eat the Rich and Know Your Station, yeah, they were the letterer on there. But going back to the writer, Christopher Sebela, as I mentioned, he was kind of my draw in. I had read some of his other books, almost all kind of creator-owned independent books. He does have some work at Marvel and DC, as kind of like everyone does. I think most of his DC work and his Marvel work is kind of like spot issues and runs here and there. I think he had a backup story during a run of Detective, a little short run on Blue Beetle, a couple issues of Harley Quinn. I think the most work he's done at DC is in the Injustice universe. He did a series, one of the many miniseries called Injustice Ground Zero. I believe those all start as like digital comics and then eventually get collected in trades. That's the world that spins out of the video games, the Injustice line.
Right.
Incredibly popular video games and comics. Never actually read them, but I know he had a long run on that. Them. Yeah. Similar kind of spot work at Marvel, like Fantastic Four and Ghost Rider. He co-wrote a couple issues of Captain Marvel with Kelly Sue DeConnick, which kind of comes in play with some of the other kind of independent work that he's done. The stuff that I know him from really is some of his like Boom and Image work. Obviously, Crowded is at Image. Another book he has at Image that I really enjoyed was called Shanghai Red. He did that with artist Joshua Hickson. Yep. That's kind of a.
I will say Shanghai Red is my only exposure to him.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
And Shanghai Red was one I picked up because the cover art was great.
Well, yeah, and
cover and interior art was great.
Yeah, he's super kind of moody and vibey artist. It's got it's kind of a dark, desaturated look to it, but that's kind of a cool revenge story, kind of set on the high seas outside Portland in I think the late 1800s or early or something like that. But it's a pretty cool book. Another book out there, an Image notable one is called Demonic. He did that with Nico Walter. It's kind of a demon infused detective story. He was also one of the contributing writers to a book called Evolution. There's kind of a skybound book, and there were, I think, 4 writers on that, all contributing to it, and they were all kind of in the skybound writer's room at the time. So that's a book that he contributed to. Another book I read at Boom that I really like called Welcome Back. He did that book with Jonathan Brandon Sawyer. It's a book about 2 like immortal assassins who every time they die, they come back. And kind of what their life is and what happens when one of them kind of becomes self-aware that they're caught in this cycle. That's a pretty cool book. Another book called Dead Letters with Chris Visions, also at Boom, did some IP work like in the Hellraiser universe and Escape from New York. He's done a lot of stuff from that as well, which is, kind of things that kind of a lot of artists have when places like Dynamite and Boom have those kind of properties. We haven't really, have we ever talked about Oni Press as a publisher? I don't think we have.
I don't think so.
I don't think we have. He's got some books there that are notable. This book called Heartthrob with Robert Wilson IV. That's got 3, I think, volumes. That's kind of a bank heist love story-ish kind of a book. A book called Blink with Hayden Sherman. Hayden Sherman is getting a lot of run right now. He's the artist on Absolute Wonder Woman at DC with Kelly Thompson. It's an early book that he did at Oni with Sebela. He has an OGN called Dead Dudes, which I haven't read, but actually looks kind of cool. He did that with Ben Sears. So that's a pretty cool, that looks like an interesting book, like a kind of a fun, maybe a little kind of ghost story romp. Mentioned co-writing with Kelly Sue DeConnick. Over at Dark Horse, they co-wrote Ghost with artist Ryan Sook. Ghost is a Dark Horse superhero that goes back to like the mid 90s. It's had multiple volumes. This was a volume from maybe about 10 years ago, volume 3 or volume 4, that character. The 2 of them co-writing again with artist Ryan Sook. A really cool book at Dark Horse that he did with Ibrahim Mustafa called High Crimes. It's an OGN. It's basically about a murder mystery set on Everest. It's a pretty,
Okay.
yeah, it's a pretty cool book. That I really enjoyed. Again, book I think I just picked up because it was Sebela's name on it. Saw it, picked it up, read it, a lot of fun. Yeah, another book that I think is worth mentioning because of how it started. It was a Comixology original back when they were kind of doing and funding those things, and then eventually collected by Dark Horse. I believe it's called Dot Self, period self, with artist Karen McGee. It's kind of a, like upload your consciousness into the cloud, and then when you die, it is downloaded into a printed body, so you can have like one last go to tie up any loose ends, before you're dead.
Sure.
It's that kind of thing, and then obviously that goes awry, and that's what the book's about. So yeah, that's dot self. I believe it's called dot self if you were to look at it, period self. And I think the last book I would mention, because I can't remember the order of things, if this came out before or after, or around the same time as Crowded, but it's a book at Aftershock, which we've talked about before with Bylines and Blood. Another book with Hayden Sherman. It's called Cold War. That was a little 5 or 6 issue series. Again, not knowing at the time who Hayden Sherman was an artist, but seeing the cover and being like, that looks kind of cool. And knowing Christopher Sebela's name, I went and picked that up. That's an interesting book. It's a company that cryo freezes people. They, freeze their heads, as for to be revived sometime later in the future.
Sure.
And what happens is when these people are revived, they are conscripted into a war that they had no idea was going on and that they're forced to fight in because that's the future that they lived in now. So
what's interesting is the emerging theme here for me is he's always interested in like, where are we 5-10 years from now with some aspect of technology and society?
Yeah, I think with the exception of Shanghai Red, that's a book in the past, but for the most part,
sure, yeah.
there's always some slightly sciencey fictiony, not really fantasy, but something slightly.
No, but it's like a sci-fi hook.
There is, and a lot of his books have, if not a horror bent, but like maybe a horror action thriller bent to it. You can kind of pick and choose 2 or 3 of those aspects of them, whether it's like a crime book with some thriller or murder mystery, detective story, maybe a little horror with some action. Here's a little action comedy. So he's a really diverse writer. And if you were to go back and read a lot of these books, I think they would feel, the voice would feel similar, like it's a similar kind of writer, but you could see he can work in a lot of different genres. And I think he's very versatile in that way. I guess generally with the exception of superhero work, he doesn't have a lot of that, at no point has he ever done like a long run at DC or a long run at Marvel. It's just kind of like he's someone that's there, some ideas, put some stories in, short stories, things like that. So whether or not that's something he doesn't want to do or doesn't feel like he needs to do, because there are plenty of creators that like, listen, I'm not signing a contract with those guys because I want the flexibility to do my own stuff. And he definitely feels like a creator who's like that, because when you look at his work and the stuff that he's known for, it's almost all indie publishers create their own stuff.
Yeah, which now I got to pick up more of his stuff, which is going to get expensive. But
yeah, it's available out there. You can get it digitally. Check your local library. Always a great place to see what's available. And if you don't want to commit right away, but he's prolific. He's a lot of series out there. A lot of mini. What amounts to miniseries, 5-6 issue runs, or maybe like a 10-12 issue book or something like that. So it seems like he's always bouncing around to different projects, different ideas, different stories, working with different artists. Maybe that's just kind of how he's wired. He's not someone in there for like, I got to write 75 issues of something. It's like, I got these ideas. I want to put them out there. And maybe he returns them every once in a while. I got a book like Heartthrob has got multiple volumes to it. And obviously Crowded here ultimately has 3 volumes in it, so, but he does seem like someone who has a lot of ideas, who always wants to work on kind of what's next, work on the next book, the next idea, the next creative team.
Yeah. And if if the rest of it's anything like this, I have to say this book has like sold me on him as one of those guys where it's like, I'm always going to check it out now.
Yeah.
Whatever he's up to.
He is someone for me that if I see his name on a solicitation for a new book, like I'm always going to be to me, it's always worth picking up the first issue because I want to see what he's doing next. You know, if he's got a new book coming out, if I see he's announced something, whatever it is, because it's probably going to be a creator-owned book. It's going to be on an indie label. But I'm always curious to see what he has next. Not saying I'm bought in 100% every time, you know, because sometimes you read it and like, oh, maybe that one's not for me, and maybe I'll check it out later and trade or something like that. But he is a writer that I always look at and see, you know, if he's putting time and effort into writing this story and getting this made, I should at least pay attention to it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
BBL. All right. So have you figured out how we're going to talk about this art team?
We're going to talk about them together because Rose Stein and Ted Brandt are the artists. I believe they live in England. They are a team. They're a collective. They work together. I don't know, maybe every so often, maybe like on a cover or something like that, one of them has done work without the other, but for the most part, they're always working together. They're a team. Crowded is probably their best known gig. It's the longest running gig. A lot of the stuff where you'll see their names, maybe some cover work or some one-off work at like a Dynamite, Valiant, Vault, Boom, some of those publishers, something like that. Maybe a story here or there that they've done. You'll see a lot of their work at DC and Marvel in some of their anthology collections. That they've contributed stories, I want to say the past handful of years to DC Pride and also Marvel's Voices Pride. Back over at DC, I know they did a story in Harley Quinn, Black, White, and Redder, which is an anthology story of short stories for featuring Harley Quinn. I believe they most really recently, earlier this year, contributed a story to what was it called? How to Lose Guy Gardner in 10 Days. Something like that, a play on How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Yeah.
I think that was a Valentine's Day thing. They've also done some spot work back over at Marvel on a couple of issues of Captain America, Champions, some Captain Marvel, New Mutants, Unstoppable Wasp. So a lot of things here and there, issue or two, small runs, and also obviously covers, a lot of variant covers, things of that nature. With their art style, it does lend to kind of a different flavor to a variant cover at a big two book from Marvel and DC. So not a ton of work in terms of kind of published sequential artwork that you can get here in the States, but you can find it here and there. And a lot of those anthologies are really, really great. And those stories are 6-8 pages, something like that. So you can see them in there. But you said Crowded, as I said, probably their best known and longest running work. And oftentimes I will say, and a lot of those anthologies and short stories, I do believe they color themselves.
Okay.
When and at times I think they've written some stuff together. So at times they can kind of cartoon their own work, and maybe for like a short story, like a 6 to 8 page submission in like a DC Pride or a Black, White, and Redder kind of thing. It's maybe makes more sense for them to do all the art themselves. But I think when it comes to an ongoing book such as Crowded, maybe that's like a bridge too far for them in terms of getting all the issues out and hitting deadlines and things like that. So for this book, they brought in a colorist, Triona Farrell, who I believe is an Irish colorist. Most of her work, the vast majority of it, is over at Marvel. You can find her on a ton of stuff, whether it's a long run, a short run, spot issue. I would say like 45-50% of her titles, maybe, of everything she's done is over at Marvel. So she's a name you'll see pop up all over the place there. But she does have some notable books over at DC, most recently Gotham City Sirens, which was a book that had a bunch of rotating artists on it, including, I think Stein and Brandt contributed a little bit to one of those issues there. But having one colorist in Triona Farrell there kept the consistency, across that book.
Oh yeah.
It brought a lot of artists to, bring a different look, a different flavor, intentionally so. So each issue kind of had a little different feel to it. But by keeping the colors the same, you get that consistency. She's also on a book right now called Batman Dark Patterns, which is kind of I think it's set in the early times of Batman, detective book, written by Dan Waters, drawn by Hayden Sherman. There's that name again. Most recently also colored a backup story in Detective, and much like Stein and Brandt has done some various anthologies at DC, like the Pride anthologies and things like that, where maybe she's coloring a short story or working on something like that. Couple image books that I really enjoyed. Rogues' Gallery, written by Hannah Rose May, art by Justin Mason, and like overall story help by Declan Shalvey, who we just talked about with Time Before Time. She did the color on that. Colored on Blackbird by Sam Humphries and Jen Bartel. Jen Bartel is a incredibly popular, well-known artist, mostly cover work and variant cover work, incredibly popular. Blackbird, I think, was her first and maybe still to date her only sequential work. And she has a very distinct style, specifically how she colors her own work. But again, with the idea of doing a sequential artwork and doing multiple issues across a run, bringing in a colorist and someone like Jonah Farrell. I think her style fits very well with someone like Jen Bartel. Over at Boom, book that I really liked that she colored was Mech Cadet U. It was done by Greg Pak and Takeshi Miyazawa. A lot of her work, when I think about it now, and the books that I've read that I know she's colored, very bright colored, either primary colors or in a case of like Crowded, like a hint of kind of neon highlighter color. It's like a little bit outside of reality. It's an illustration. It's a little bit cartoony, but not like over the top, kind of not like over the top loud, but definitely just like a little bit off reality. It's a little bit heightened. It's kind of what she's done. I think the last one I'll mention is just because I love this book. Over at IDW, she worked with Stephen Mooney on a book called Half Past Danger 2, Dead to Reichs. So Half Past Danger was a book that Stephen Mooney, I believe, the first one, I know he wrote and drew it. He may have colored it the first one. It's a World War II book with dinosaurs. I don't know how else to explain it other than that, because that's literally what the book's about. And this was the sequel, Half Past Danger 2.
Wait, have you talked about that book on this podcast before?
Maybe I have. It's super fun. It's super weird.
Maybe it was like our first Christmas special, like books that are great, but we can't talk about it on the podcast.
Yeah. It's a super weird, super fun book. But for the sequel follow-up, I guess maybe for whatever time constraints or one different feel, Jonah Farrell was brought in to color that one, as opposed to, I believe, Stephen Mooney kind of doing it all himself. So yeah, some of the books that she's done, again, if you're going to see her name anywhere, it's probably over at Marvel. Again, ton of work there, but does take time to work on some of these creator-owned books and smaller indie publisher stuff. So someone who stays busy, and again, a name you see kind of all over. So, and again, once again, I mentioned the letterer, Cardinal Ray. We already talked about her a little bit back when we did the two books, Eat the Rich and Know Your Station. Yep.
And there's a lot to say about good lettering, but not really in the abstract. So I think, we'll shout that out as we go and encounter.
I would say, this book does not a lot of heavy lifting, but it does some very obvious things that helps make the book incredibly clear.
Because obviously you're going to have app typing and texting.
Yeah. So there's a visualization on the page that when you point it out, it's like, well, duh, how else are you going to do it? But then there are other books that find other ways to do it, some more or less successful than this one. I think here, the intention is very clear in terms of delineating who is speaking, who is typing, who is talking, all of that, and to do it to do it subtly, but also very obviously. You don't have to be told what you're being shown. It's on the page for you. So I think there's a lot of work went into that to make it very clear, to make it invisible, as we talk about. Great lettering is oftentimes invisible. So when you see it, you just register it on the page as it is what it is. You get exactly what you're supposed to get out of it without drawing attention to itself. So when we get to it next week, definitely next week when we start into the book, talk about some of the tricks that they use to help with the lettering, to help with the storytelling. So, but yeah, that's the team we have on it. And I think and again, I think this goes back to what we said at the top about the weird publication history of it. In fact, they did 12 issues in a row, as any book that comes out is, you work on it, hit your deadlines, issues come out, and then to have that 2-year gap and to get the entire creative team back, to get everyone back again to write another volume. That's what makes me think that they had these issues planned, they had these stories planned, and something about where the industry was in 2020, 2021, coming out of the pandemic, coming out of the shutdown, made them feel it was a better idea to put it out as a one shot versus them coming back to it a couple years later and being like, hey, we have another story here, let's work on it. Like it feels to me like they had another story ready, and it took a while for it to come out. Otherwise, people move on to different jobs. You write other scripts, work on other projects, things of that nature. It's hard to get everyone back on a book again. So that's why I get the sense that obviously when you take a break in a book, you would like for everyone to come back. You want to keep that consistency. You want to work with the same team again. But this one here feels like they were working on it, and then it didn't have an outlet. So they worked on it and got it finished or got it near completion. And once it was going to be published, they found the time to get it all done. But it seemed like they were going to keep going, and then circumstances beyond their control stopped it. And again, no way to confirm that, but just my sense of having read a lot of books and books that take breaks like this, whenever you have, especially a creator-owned book, that there's always some there can be some iffiness sometimes with the publication, because what are the sales like? How much story do you want to tell versus what you're allowed to tell? Those things are always up in the air. They're always more complicated for creator-owned books. So I'm glad to see that they were able to come back to it and have the whole team there again, and not feel like they had to, kind of bring in any sort of pinch hitters on any level to tell the story they wanted to tell.
Yeah. Always inspiring or encouraging to see that. And I'm foggy on the end of the series. So I think it's still technically open. I mean, certainly anytime you build a world, even if your characters reach their arc. So I think we're covering the series because we think it's finished. It's now been 2 years since the 2-year gap.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, but this is the kind of thing where, you could, if they decided to go back to this world and just bring in different characters, but use the same idea, flip it and come at a new angle. The world is such, this world of, complete gig economy, running the show, there are avenues they could go with. Now, I don't think they would do that. I think they're attached to their characters because this very much is a character piece, for all the social commentary, for all the kind of ridiculous violence and killing and all that, for all the mayhem. This is a character piece, and it very much is that buddy comedy where we're focusing on these two women, on Charlie and Vita, and what kind of their relationship is, where it starts, how it grows, where it ends up. And so I think you always want to follow those characters. So as much as I enjoy the world that it's in, I don't think this is the kind of place where they could go back in cold. There'd have to be a link back character-wise to the characters they started with, because I think that's the way in. I think that's the ultimately the real hook of the story. Yeah.
It's fast-paced, but these feel like long issues to me. It's a fast-paced story that keeps you page turning, but there's not a lot of just like splash pages where you just kind of look at it like, oh, that's a cool picture, and flip. There's just constant, plot beats unfolding. They're not precious about their storytelling. They are like, here's your great idea. Here's where you think it's going to go. Yeah. And 4 issues later, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it was only 4 issues ago we were worried about X, Y, and Z, when now we're into A, B, and C.
I
love the tempo.
It moves. Again, the base of the story is there's someone who's got a hit on them, and it's over $1 million. And so everyone in this world is out to get them. And it's one target, one bodyguard versus basically everyone in LA. So there's constant action. There's always someone after them. It's a constant chase, you know. So even in their down times, even in the down moments, you never feel safe, secure, you know, because the looming threat is out there always, whether it's a specific person or just the general idea. So there's always this forward momentum with the story that you can never get comfortable. You can never rest. You can take a breath, but you know that the next breath is going to be back on the run again. So they're able to put that into the storytelling, I think, they put that on the page. So as you're reading it, I think you're right, Mike, as you're reading it, you fall into that pace with it. You know, you're with them as they're in car chases, that they're being shot at, whatever it is, whatever the action is happening, it's propelling you forward. And they're able to put that on the page, and in a lot of ways, when they catch their breath, when the characters catch their breath, you're catching your breath as a reader.
Yeah.
You know, you're taking a break with them and being like, whoa, wow, those previous 4, 5, 6 pages, whatever, like that was a ride, you know, take a break, move on to the next thing.
Yeah. I'm excited to dig in. And if you are trying to read in single issue, you will encounter the problem we described. When you Google it, you know, the AI answer, all kinds of other stuff is going to tell you it's a 12-issue series. That's sort of a lie. And if you look at a 12-issue series, then there's 3 trades, you would think, oh, it's 4 issues per trade. It's 6 per trade.
It's 6 and a standalone. So this is one, yeah. If you can find the single issues 1 to 12, that's great. But obviously, I think this is probably, at this point, easiest to find in trade. You find all 3 trades, whether you find them at a little comic shop, your library, wherever it is, available digitally. You know, that'll be the way to go. But you know, if you find the single issues, I'm all about reading in single issue floppies. If you find them somewhere at a shop, back issue bin, something like that, more power to you. Just know that if you find all 12, you're going to be a volume short.
Yeah.
Yeah. Volume 3 is only available in trade. So at some point you got to break with what you got and get a trade collection.
Yeah. And you know, knowing me, I will likely pick these up in single issue when I have the chance, but I've got them, the first one in physical trade from Cape and Cow Comics in Oakland, California, and the other 2 digitally. So it's a hot mess for me anyway.
Yeah. And for this reread, I'm going to be rereading the trades digitally, rereading the trades in digital format. So, you know, so in terms of if there are anything else extras in the single issues, I'll have to go back and check and see. But I don't know what they have other than maybe, like, I know the trades have some, you know, like a lot of trades do. They have like a variant cover gallery and all that. There are some fun variants for some of the issues here. But in terms of extras, I don't know how much they have in the single issues that wouldn't be collected in the trades. So, but for this reread here, I'm going with the trades.
Good deal. All right. Well, we will see you next Thursday for Crowded Volume 1, issues 1 through 6. And, you know, follow us on, the social media landscape is so bleak right now. Follow us on Blue Sky, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter in that order.
I'm good with that. Yeah. We're on all 4 of those, but yeah, in terms of
I don't know. Yeah, for how much
hierarchy
longer,
there. Yeah. But we are on all those. Storied Arcs, StoriedArcs.com, obviously. Anywhere you can find your podcast, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, like and share with a friend. As you're listening to this in real time, we're coming up on Christmas. Buy Crowded, all 3 volumes for a friend, and then share the podcast with them. I think it's a great gift for anyone who likes action, comedy, satire. It's got a little bit of everything, and I think it does it all very well. So very excited to dig into this, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening.
Peace.